almost, in a way, if I can like phrase this properly, they're kind of like preparing like for an option offense. Like you don't see it a lot, so like when you do see it, it's a little different, right? So just the way they play coverage is a little different than everybody else's zone coverage. You know, which is I think those guys do a really good job. I mean, he has a lot of video evidence of playing really good football, and
it's awesome.
You know,
it's awesome. You know, it's always good.
He would probably admit that LSU didn't go exactly the way he wanted it to go, but ultimately, I saw a guy that's played a lot of football, a lot of experience, and we've talked about this with a couple other guys, and I just thought that our receiving room needed an older guy that had a lot of experience. Now, with that being said, I had no idea, like I kind of had an idea of the player I was getting, right? But a lot of times, especially with the transfer portal, you don't have an idea a lot of times of the person you're getting. You try. Like you try to do as much research as you can do. Where we knocked it out the park with him is his character and his leadership. It's elite. Like he is an elite human being. And so I don't know if we necessarily knew that. We kind of got lucky with that in a way. We knew the player we were going to get, and he's had a really good year, but he's had a bigger impact on our offense with leadership and character. And he is the one in that receiver room that keeps everything going in the right direction. And he blocks his ass off, and he does the dirty work, and I think everybody follows suit with that. But that's been his biggest impact.
Shannon, Indiana team better.
You two guys, man. I'll let y'all wrestle it out.
Getting to this stage is a big deal for any head coach, right? And you've been with Cristobal now for 3 years. And look, every head coach has his own style and way of doing things. I'm curious, just like over these 3 years, what has impressed you about his leadership style, the way he manages the team, that you feel like has allowed Miami to get to this point and play for a championship?
I think talent evaluation is one of the biggest things in the acquisition of talent. It takes talented kids to play at this level. And he has a keen eye of what he wants, especially when it comes to up front and how to build a team. And just watching him, build this team from the O-line, D-line back, and it's been eye-opening to me. And so now I do think that other than like just talent, the way that he managed this year with the couple losses we had was the reason we're here, because there wasn't a huge overreaction. It was more so of, hey, let's get back to the process, let's get back to work, let's figure out what we have to do to be better. It wasn't a blow up or anything like that, which I think at times as assistant coaches you're anticipating certain things, like you always anticipate the worst, right? But I do think that his demeanor in those times of trouble was really helpful for our staff and our team.
Do you think that's different this year compared to your previous 2 years? When losses happen, did he handle it different?
No, it's been pretty consistent. Even my first year here, we didn't lose one till like 4 or 5 games, right? The first year, I think we went like 5-0, and then we had a couple hiccups. But ultimately, when you first get to a place, you're always curious about that, And so it's been pretty consistent. We stay pretty even keel through adversity, which I don't think you can, coach in a productive way if you're not. And I think that bleeds over to our kids and bleeds over to how you manage games, because if you can weather the storm, typically you can have some success. And so, but the season is the same way. Look, it's a long season, and there's only one team that didn't go through adversity, and they're still playing, right? They've had none, and so obviously they probably had some adversity, but they haven't had a loss. And so, how you handle those losses is important.
It's crazy. It's my last college football game. My life speaking.
How would you kind of describe the identity of the Indiana defense and what they
championships like last year, my career. It's awesome.
Well, they're very hard hard to run the ball against. They're very gap sound. They strain. They get off blocks probably as good as I've seen. It's hard to sustain blocks against them. And I don't really know why, other than they play with extreme effort. They strain. And so their back end does an unbelievable job of disguising coverages. They do a good job of playing. I mean, their zone defense is as good as I've seen. I mean, they're mostly zone. They'll play some man at times, but they're mostly zone. And the way they mix up zone coverages is really elite. They don't really get into a rhythm as far as like they're gonna. It's almost like I would say it's almost like, you know, they have these things they do, how much ever it is, let's say it's like 8, and they just kind of pick them out of a hat, you know. I don't know if you know, they'll call a similar coverage on 1st and 10 that they do on 3rd and 4th, you know. So I mean, it's hard to get in a rhythm against them because they're mixing stuff up on the back end a lot, and they're just really good at zone coverage. I mean, their eyes are on the quarterback. They move with the quarterback. They do an elite job of getting hands on the ball. They probably have more tech ball interceptions than I've seen in a while, and so it's a savvy defensive unit in general.
Obviously,
Shannon kind of touched on it there, but it seems like Indiana does a lot of post-snap movement and mix things up. How are you and Carson able to work and simulate that, you know, go over it and film? Like, how much can you address that without before you actually see it?
Well, I mean, the good thing is our defense and their defense are very similar. I mean, from similar backgrounds, right? So we go against, you know, our defense obviously every week. We have, you know, certain sets that we do against them every week. That's been very helpful because ultimately, you know, there's nothing better than like game reps, and you get those game reps in those settings. But, you know, I would say the good thing is our pass game is not dictated on pre-snap looks, if that makes sense. I mean, we're a progression-based offense, and I mean, our quarterback, you know, we put a lot on him as far as seeing space and, you know, going through his progression and getting into the open guy. So I feel like we're equipped, but ultimately there hadn't been a lot of people have a lot of success versus them, and so, you know, we'll see how it goes.
Your third down offense, third down. How important is that in a game like this? Obviously does that well.
Well, I mean, you got to do better on second down. That's a lot of third down is getting in third down situations where you can actually execute. I mean, there's not a lot of football teams that execute a lot of third and longs on a routine basis. And so if you can stay out of those, you can have a much better chance at converting them. And so our third down rate for the last probably 2 or 3 games has been really high, and it has a lot to do with what we do on first and second down.
Shannon, the 3 playoff games offensively have looked different. How much do you go into the game? Because sometimes you can grind it out, you can throw it like last game. Just how much does that play into a game like this?
I mean, look, every game's different. I mean, the people you're playing is different, the atmosphere is different, the weather is different. So there's a lot of things that dictate the flow of the game, you know. And so, you know, my job ultimately is to score 1 more point than the opposing team. However that looks is how it looks. But ultimately, I mean, I anticipate this game to be one that's we're going to have to grind it out. You know, I mean, that's just the way it is. Their defense doesn't give up a lot of explosive plays. On the year, they have only given up a handful, right? And so ultimately, this game is going to be played probably intermediate to the line of scrimmage, right? And so I know that. And so ultimately, we have to be very efficient. Like my man over here, I mean, getting first downs is crucial, right? You got to keep the chains moving, and you got to get first downs.
Guys are super excited, and in the locker room, guys are just
Fletcher has been great.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think they started up?
I mean, probably opportunities. You know, he understands that these games carry a lot of weight, and guys like him tend to rise in the most crucial situations. And so, and he's an elite player, and he's really, you know, he's been the carrier of this offense. You know, we've leaned on him in the most critical times, and he's came through. You got to give a lot of credit to our O-line. you got to give a lot of credit to our tight ends and our receivers. Like, it isn't just one guy in the run game. It takes everybody. You know, and we're not one of those offenses that allow receivers to get away with not playing physical, you know, and so those guys blocking safeties and being really aggressive in the run game helps too. But obviously Mark is the one toting it the most of the time, and he's been elite. But he's also just been that guy since I've been here. You know, he's a guy you can depend on in tough times. He's a very steady personality, high character, cares a lot, and he's just hard to tackle. Big kid.
I think match well.
Just curious how much you've talked to Corey about his experience, maybe what to face. Have you talked? Is any discussions this week about that kind of stuff?
At length. I've talked to Corey a lot. I talked to Corey a lot in general.
Ladies and gentlemen, please stand by as the Hurricanes rotate podiums.
This week I've obviously leaned on him a pretty good bit because of the similarities in defense, and obviously he's worked with those guys, and so, you know, I don't know how much it'll help, we'll see, but, you know, we have had multiple discussions.
If I can follow, just how much has he helped all season long? How's he helped you all season long? You said you've talked to him throughout.
Yeah, I mean, I'll bounce ideas off of him just in general of what defense.
Once again, ladies and gentlemen, please stand by as the Hurricanes rotate podiums.
You know, just philosophy stuff, you know, I mean, like, why do they do certain things like they do? I'm more curious than I am anything when I see something that's a little bit different, or if I see people doing something over and over again, then, because I'm not wired like a defensive coach, you know, and so there's a difference between offense and defensive coaches, and so sometimes I'm just more curious in how they see things. You know why offensive and defensive coaches are wired different? Huh?
I mean, there's a huge difference. But
what do you think the one biggest difference is?
well, I mean, one's trying to just obvious you're trying to score, but the aggressiveness.
We can punt.
Okay.
They can't.
So
Does that make sense?
of course.